My little sister convinced herself she was meant to take my husband. Have you ever felt a betrayal so deep, so twisted, that it made you question everything you thought you knew about love, family, and even reality itself? Because that's exactly what happened when my own sister, my baby sister, decided she was destined to steal my husband, forge his signature, fake a pregnancy, and burn our entire family to the ground to prove it. The sound of that paper hitting the picnic table? It wasn't just paper. It was the sound of a gunshot straight to my heart. 40 people, 40 pairs of eyes, suddenly fixed on us. I remember the scraping sound of a lawn chair, almost deafening in the sudden quiet. My mom's potato salad sat half-served, the spoon still upright in the bowl. My dad, beer halfway to his lips, just froze, like moving would make this nightmare undeniably real. And Brooke, she smiled. That's the part that still haunts me. She smiled because, for one agonizing second, she thought this was their big announcement. She thought Ethan was finally telling everyone about them. Oh, how wrong she was. Then Ethan started reading. His voice, flat and carrying across the whole backyard, laid out words like shared destiny, intellectual soulmates, and a new chapter together, away from the people holding him back. He looked up from the page, his eyes locking onto hers. "Those are your words, Brooke," he said, "from the fellowship application. The one with my name on it. The one I never signed." My mother let out a sound I'd never heard from her before, a choked gasp, like the air had been violently knocked out of her. My dad slowly, deliberately, set his beer down without taking a single sip. Brooke's face, 23 feet away at the edge of the yard, went the color of the paper plates stacked on the folding table. "Ethan?" I heard myself say his name, like a question, needing him to tell me this wasn't real. He didn't even look at me. His gaze stayed fixed on Brooke, burning into her. "You broke into my email," he accused, his voice steel. "You stole my blueprints. You applied to a fellowship in Austin using my name, and you wrote a love letter as the cover page." Brooke's voice cracked. "That's not. We don't have anything." Ethan cut her off, his tone chillingly calm. "We never had anything. I told you that in March. I told you at the site in April. And I'm telling you now, in front of your entire family, because apparently that's the only way you'll hear it." The look Brooke gave me then, I'll never, ever forget it. It wasn't shame. It wasn't even fear. It was pure, venomous betrayal, aimed directly at me, as if I was the one who had wronged her. She grabbed her purse, slung it over her shoulder, and walked straight through the side gate, without another word. The latch clicked shut behind her, a small, final sound. And then there we were, 40 people, standing in my parents' backyard, in absolute, suffocating silence, holding paper plates of potato salad, watching my marriage and my family come apart in real time. I honestly thought that was the worst moment of my life. I had no idea what was coming next. My name is Claire. That summer, I was 31, and I'd been married to Ethan Voss for 6 years. I taught 10th grade American history at Millbrook High, the same school I graduated from, just 3 miles from my childhood home on Lehnan Street. Ethan? He was a structural engineer at Marlowe and Finch, a smaller architecture firm downtown. He was meticulous, the kind of guy who'd check load calculations twice, even when the software already confirmed it. He was careful. I loved that about him. And Brooke was my sister. 7 years younger than me, 23 that summer. My parents, Diane and Walter Wickham, had her almost by accident, a surprise after they'd pretty much decided they were done having kids. I used to joke that she got all the leftover attention I never had, the relaxed, been there, done that version of parenting. She grew up soft in a way I never got to be. No real curfews, never had a job before 22. She drifted after graduating from a 2-year communications program, landing a receptionist job at a local dental office. She was restless there, always waiting for something bigger to happen to her. I don't think Brooke set out to fall in love with my husband. Honestly, I think it happened slowly, insidious like rot in a wall you can't see, until one day the whole thing just gives out at once. There's this photo from 2 summers before all of this. We were at Lake Winsome, the little lake house my parents always rented in July. Ethan standing waist deep in the water, laughing, And I'm off to the side, probably doubled over laughing at my own bad throw. But Brooke? She's standing closer to him than anyone else in the shot, looking at him instead of the camera. I didn't even notice it then, not until months later when my mom group texted the picture and I finally looked at it properly. That very same weekend, I remember Brooke got strangely quiet at dinner when Ethan complimented a dress I was wearing. And later that night, when I found her sitting alone on the dock, she told me she didn't think she'd ever find someone who looked at her the way Ethan looked at me. I hugged her. I told her she would. God, if only I'd known I was comforting her for all the wrong reasons. It started, as far as I can tell, subtly. At our wedding, Brooke gave a toast that was 9 minutes long and mentioned Ethan's name more than mine. Everyone just laughed it off. Oh, little sister being dramatic, you know? She even cried harder than my mom did.
I found it sweet at the time.
I had no idea what I was truly looking at. Over the next 4 years, it built up in ways so small, I just kept explaining them away. Ethan once casually mentioned he wanted to get into pour-over coffee. 3 days later, Brooke showed up at Sunday dinner with a $600 Braille espresso machine, still in the box. Just because I saw it and thought of the family, she said. She didn't even drink coffee. Never liked it. But she insisted it was for everyone. Another time, Ethan mentioned an obscure architecture book at a barbecue, some academic text on brutalist housing in Eastern Europe. The next time I saw Brooke, she was carrying that exact book around in her tote bag for weeks. I never once saw her open it. I even asked her about it at a birthday dinner, just making conversation, and she couldn't even tell me the author's name. Then she started showing up at Redwood Commons, the mixed-use project Ethan was working on downtown. Weekday mornings with 2 iced coffees. She'd even bought a hard hat online because OSHA required one on site, and she wanted an excuse to be there, to stand near the trailer and wait for him on his break. Ethan pulled her aside that April, the month before everything imploded, and told her plainly to stop coming by. He told me about it that night, frustrated, embarrassed for her. She just doesn't hear it, he said. It's like talking to a wall that agrees with everything you say and then does the opposite. I even brought it up with Brooke once, gently, over a coffee she didn't drink. I asked if she had a crush on my husband. She laughed so hard, she had to put her cup down. God, Claire, no, she said. That's insane. He's basically my brother. And then, 3 weeks later, she told our cousin at a family dinner that what she felt for Ethan wasn't a crush at all.
It was chemistry, she said.
Real chemistry. The kind you don't choose. The kind that finds you whether you want it or not. I let it go. I told myself she was young, dramatic, always looking for a story where she was the main character. I had a full-time job, a marriage I was proud of, a life I thought was completely stable. I just didn't think my sister was capable of what she turned out to be capable of. No one did. There was one incident back in March that I didn't understand the weight of until much, much later. Brooke asked me, completely out of nowhere over the phone, if Ethan and I had ever thought about kids. It felt invasive at the time, a little pushy, but not alarming. I told her the truth because she was my sister and I trusted her with it. Ethan and I had spent 3 years and close to $40,000 trying to figure out why we couldn't conceive. 18 months earlier, a specialist at Cedar Grove Fertility Center had finally given us an answer, a rare, permanent condition called azoospermia, caused by a failed varicocele repair years before I even met him. There was no path to biological children for us, not without donor sperm on his side, no way around it. It was one of the hardest things we'd ever gone through together, absolutely soul-crushing. And yet, strangely, it was also one of the things that made our marriage feel unbreakable. We'd cried in a parking lot outside that clinic, held each other, and decided that we were still enough for each other. I told Brooke all of that in confidence. She said she was sorry. But if I'm honest with myself now, her voice didn't sound sorry at all. It sounded like she was filing it away. Then, another smaller moment, one I only understood later. In April, 3 weeks before that fellowship email, Brooke asked to borrow my laptop at a family dinner. Her phone had died, she said, and she needed to check her email. I didn't think anything of it. I was in the kitchen with my mom for maybe 10 minutes while she used it. When I opened my laptop the next day, my browser history had a single unfamiliar entry near the top, a login page for Ethan's work email portal. Visited, then closed. I remember staring at it for a second, confused, before telling myself it had to be an old tab, a stray ad, something explainable. I closed the browser without investigating further. It wasn't until months later, sitting with Detective Abra, going through a timeline of the forgery, that I finally understood exactly what I'd been looking at that morning. And exactly how much earlier than I'd assumed my sister had already started building toward what came next. The morning everything changed for good was a Tuesday in late May. Ethan opened his laptop at the kitchen table while I made coffee, and I watched the color drain out of his face in real time. He just turned the screen toward me, without a word. It was an email confirmation from something called the Santino Design Fellowship, a prestigious 2-year program in Austin, funded by an architectural foundation. They flew finalists out for interviews. The applicant name at the top. His. Ethan Voss. Attached below it was a cover letter he had never written. A set of blueprints he instantly recognized as his own, stolen work. And 3 paragraphs about starting a new chapter somewhere far from the people holding him back. It was signed with a digital signature that wasn't his, but had been meticulously built, pixel by pixel, to look exactly like it. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, very carefully, he closed the laptop, as if it might explode. "I know exactly who did this," he said. He didn't want a quiet conversation. He wanted her exposed, in front of every single person who had ever loved her, in the one place she couldn't run from it. 3 days later, at my parents' 4th of July barbecue, he brought a printed copy of the whole application in a manila folder, and he waited until the yard was full. Monday morning came apart before I'd even finished my coffee. Ethan's phone rang at 8:40. I watched him answer it, standing at the kitchen counter. Watched his shoulders visibly drop an inch with every sentence he heard. Security had already locked his badge. HR wanted him in a conference room by 10. When he asked why, the woman on the phone, a compliance officer named Pamela Ose, told him a formal complaint had been filed over the weekend, serious enough that legal was involved before he'd even had breakfast. The complaint had come from Brooke. She had emailed his director and HR at 12:47 that morning, CCNG 3 other partners at the firm for good measure. In the email, she claimed she and Ethan had been having an affair for 2 years. She claimed he had stolen her original architectural concepts and passed them off as his own for the fellowship application. In reality, she wrote, the whole submission had been her idea, her vision, something they'd built together in secret. She even claimed that at the barbecue, in front of witnesses, he had cornered her and threatened her into silence. Attached to the email were screenshots. Dozens of them. Text conversations between the two of them stretching back months, full of inside jokes, pet names, references to specific moments. A conversation about tile samples at a hardware store. A joke about a mutual coworker's terrible parallel parking. A reference to a movie they'd supposedly watched together on a night I remembered clearly because Ethan had been home with me, on our couch, watching a documentary about the Hoover Dam. The screenshots were so detailed, too detailed to be improvised. Whoever built them had been paying close, careful attention to the small texture of Ethan's life for a very long time. He was suspended by 11 that morning, escorted out of a building he'd worked in for 6 years, a cardboard box under one arm. I drove down to pick him up. He didn't say a word the whole ride home. He just stared out the passenger window at the strip malls going by, his jaw working like he was chewing on something he couldn't swallow. My phone rang before we'd even pulled into the driveway. It was my mother. Brooke was at her house, curled up on the living room couch, sobbing so hard she could barely breathe, showing her screenshot after screenshot on her phone. My mother's voice had a wobble in it I didn't like. "Claire," she said, "I don't know what to believe." "There is nothing to believe," I told her, my voice tight. "Ethan didn't do this." "She has proof," my mother insisted. "She has messages, timestamps. Why would she make all that up?" I didn't have an answer for her that night. Not one she was ready to hear. Anyway, I hung up the phone and sat in my car in my own driveway for 11 minutes before I could make myself go inside. That was the first ceiling. I thought nothing could get worse than my husband losing his job over a lie. I was wrong. So wrong. Within 48 hours. Wednesday night. An unknown number texted my phone. No name, no context, just 2 chilling lines. Look in his glove box. Then, 30 seconds later, a second message. He is not who you think he is. I sat with my phone in my hand for a long time before I did anything about it. I told myself not to go outside. I told myself a grown woman doesn't search her husband's car because an anonymous number told her to. Then I went outside anyway, barefoot, on the driveway, at 10 p.m., and I opened the glove box of Ethan's truck like it might hold an answer to a question I hadn't even let myself ask yet. There was a parking ticket folded behind the registration, dated May 14th. A street address I recognized immediately. Elm Terrace Apartments, Brooks Building. Time stamped 11:47 p.m. My stomach dropped so fast, I had to sit down on the curb. I went inside and put the ticket on the kitchen table between us. I asked Ethan, as calmly as I could manage, my hands shaking, to explain it to me. To his credit, he didn't lie. He didn't stall. He told me the whole thing, right there, standing in our kitchen under the harsh overhead light. A month earlier, Brooke had texted him photos of his stolen blueprints spread out on her coffee table, along with a message telling him to come get them, or she'd report him for something. He still wasn't sure what. At the time, it had felt like an empty threat from someone spiraling.
He went.
He grabbed the folder. He left within 4 minutes. He never told me because, in his words, he thought he'd handled a small, embarrassing problem quietly and he didn't want to give it more weight in our marriage than it deserved. I believed him. I want to be crystal clear about that because for one terrible hour that week, I wasn't sure I would.
But the story held together.
It matched every fact I already had. What it also told me, though, was something worse than a moment of doubt about my husband. It told me Brooke had been standing outside her own apartment complex that same night, camera ready, timing his visit down to the minute, building a paper trail against a man who had done nothing but come retrieve something that had been stolen from him in the first place. She hadn't caught him doing something wrong. She had meticulously staged the appearance of it. The doorbell rang 3 times, fast on Thursday evening. Hard enough that I heard it from the bedroom. My mother stood on our porch, holding a manila folder of her own, her eyes red-rimmed, her voice already raised before she was fully through the door. He groomed her, she said, her voice raw. Do you understand that, Claire? She was 23. He is 34. He has been grooming your sister for years, and you have been too blind to see it. Mom, that's not what happened. I protested, my own voice rising. She did his structural calculations for free, she countered, dropping the folder on our kitchen table, pages sliding across the surface. Did you know that? She knew about the cracks in the concrete at Redwood Commons because he confided in her. In her, Claire, not in you. I sat down slowly because my legs didn't feel entirely reliable. I started going through the folder while my mother stood over me, arms crossed. There were more screenshots, a printed email thread, and near the bottom, tucked between 2 pages, a single glossy photo, an ultrasound image. Black and white. The curved shape of it, instantly recognizable. My mother hadn't mentioned it yet. She was building up to it. I picked it up and looked at it for a second longer than I meant to. Something about the corner of the image looked strange to me, a faint, pale smudge near the bottom edge, like a logo or a watermark that had been mostly, but not entirely, cropped out. I couldn't make out what it said. I told myself it didn't matter, that I was looking for problems that weren't there because I was desperate for something, anything, to be false about the last week of my life. I sat it down and kept reading the other pages, and I didn't think about that smudge again until I had a reason to. She hasn't eaten a real meal in 4 days, Claire, my mother continued, her voice climbing towards something desperate. She's having panic attacks. I found her on the bathroom floor Tuesday night, hyperventilating, saying she couldn't breathe. Do you understand what you and Ethan have done to her? What if something happens to her, and the last thing any of us did was call her a liar? I want to be honest about how that landed, because it landed exactly the way it was meant to. For one long, sick moment, I felt that old reflex again. The urge to apologize. To soften. to prioritize my sister's fragility over my own certainty about what was true. Then I made myself remember the parking ticket, the fake screenshots, the call to my principal. And I understood, with something like grief, that my mother wasn't lying to me. She genuinely believed Brooke was in crisis. She had no way of knowing yet that fear for a child's well-being was just one more tool in an arsenal that already included forgery, theft, and fabricated medical evidence. Mom, if she's really struggling like that, she needs a doctor, not a lawsuit, I said, trying to keep my voice even. Those are two different problems, and you're only funding one of them. Your father and I did what we had to do, my mother said. And that was when she told me the part that actually knocked the air out of me. They had drained their retirement account. $42,000. Nearly everything they had, to retain a lawyer for Brooke. A civil suit had already been filed. Harassment, theft of intellectual property, emotional distress. The lawyer, a sharp, expensive woman named Denise Corwin, wanted a $10,000 retainer by Friday just to keep the case moving forward. Ethan and I had $14,000 in savings. All of it. I stood in my kitchen, holding a stranger's screenshots and my mother's righteous fury. And I understood, for the first time, that this wasn't going to end with an apology and a family dinner where everyone agreed to move past it. This was a war my sister had already been fighting for months, while the rest of us were still catching up to the fact that it had even started. Before any of that went public, she worked the group chat first. Our extended family had this text thread, going back years, 17 people deep, originally just for coordinating holiday dinners and birthday gifts. On Thursday afternoon, Brooke posted a single message into it. No context, no explanation, just a screenshot of one of the fabricated text conversations, the one referencing the Hoover Dam documentary Ethan and I had actually watched together, followed by the words, "I think everyone deserves to know the truth about what's been happening in this family." Then she left the thread entirely, muting her own notifications. So for the next 6 hours, the rest of the family debated what they'd just seen without her there to answer a single question about it. By the time I saw the messages myself, my Uncle Pete had already typed, "This is disgusting. Ethan should be ashamed." And nobody had corrected him yet. Because nobody, except me and Ethan, knew the screenshot was fabricated. I typed out 4 different responses before deleting all of them and calling my mother instead. I understood then that defending myself in a group chat built for birthday coordination was never going to be a fair fight. By Friday, Brooke had taken it public. She posted a long, carefully written statement to her social media, over 1,000 words, accusing Ethan of manipulation, of grooming, of stealing her creative work, and gaslighting her into silence for years. She tagged Marlo and Finch directly. She tagged 3 mutual family friends. She wrote that she was coming forward now at great personal cost because she couldn't watch him hurt someone else the way he'd hurt her. The comments filled with heart emojis and messages of support within an hour. People I'd known my whole life, people who had eaten dinner at my table, were typing, "Stay strong and we believe you," under a post built entirely out of a stolen fellowship application and a folder of fabricated screenshots. My Aunt Carol called me that afternoon to ask gently if I was doing okay, in a tone that made it clear she'd already picked a side, and it wasn't mine. A cousin I hadn't spoken to in 2 years sent me a single message, "Praying for your family." That felt less like sympathy and more like a verdict. Ethan's own mother, who lived 4 hours away and had met Brooke maybe 6 times in her life, called him in tears, asking if it was true. If any of it could possibly be true. Because surely, a 23-year-old girl wouldn't invent something like this out of nothing. That was the part that scared me most. More than the lawsuit, more than the money. Brooke wasn't just attacking our marriage. She was rewriting the entire family's understanding of who we were, one relative at a time, and she was doing it faster than I could keep up. On Saturday, she called the front office of Millbrook High School and asked to speak to my principal. I found out on Monday morning, called into his office before first period, where he told me carefully, professionally, clearly uncomfortable, that his office had received a call from a woman identifying herself as my sister, alleging that I had a history of covering for my husband's misconduct and that parents in the district deserved to know. My principal, to his credit, told her the school had no jurisdiction over my personal life, and ended the call. But he felt obligated to tell me it had happened. I sat in his office, holding my school ID, and understood that Brooke was no longer only trying to win. She was trying to make sure I had nothing left standing if she lost. She found me at the grocery store on Sunday afternoon, in the cereal aisle of the Kroger on Route 9, 3 days after the principal had called her back and shut the conversation down. I hadn't seen her in person since the barbecue. She looked thinner, tired around the eyes, and for one unguarded second, I felt that old instinct kick in. The urge to ask if she was okay, the reflex of 23 years of being her older sister. Then she opened her mouth. "You've turned everyone against me," she said, low enough that only I could hear it. Though her voice was shaking with something that might have been rage, or might have been genuine grief, I still don't know which. "Do you have any idea what it's like being the only one in this family nobody believes?" "Brooke, you forged a federal fellowship application," I stated, my voice flat. "I did what I had to do to finally be heard," she shot back. "You have no idea what it's like living in your shadow. Every single thing I ever did got compared to you. Every job, every relationship, every single choice. I finally had something that was mine, something real, and you and Ethan destroyed it in front of the whole family because you couldn't stand the idea of me having anything good." I stood there in the cereal aisle, holding a box of oatmeal I didn't even remember picking up, and I understood with a strange kind of clarity that she believed every single word of what she was saying. That was somehow worse than if she'd just been lying to my face. She had built a version of events where she was the one being persecuted, where a stolen fellowship application and a stranger's ultrasound photo were simply collateral damage in her fight to finally be seen. And she was going to keep believing it, no matter what evidence anyone put in front of her. I put the oatmeal back on the shelf, told her I hoped she got whatever help she needed, and walked out without buying anything at all. My father called me that same Sunday night and asked if I could meet him Tuesday morning at Pete's Corner Diner, the place he'd gone every Tuesday at 7 a.m. for as long as I could remember. His voice was strange on the phone, quiet in a way my father was never quiet. "There's something you need to hear from me first," he said, "before you hear it from your mother." I asked him what it was. He said it would be easier in person. I lay awake most of that night, trying to imagine what could possibly be left to tell me that hadn't already been thrown at us that week. I fell asleep without an answer, which turned out to be the last uncomplicated night's sleep I would get for a long time. My father was already in the corner booth when I got to Pete's on Tuesday. A coffee sat in front of him, untouched. He looked older than he had a week earlier. He looked like a man who hadn't slept. "She's pregnant," he said, before I'd even sat down. "Brooke. She says the baby is Ethan's." I laughed. And I want to be honest about that, because it wasn't a normal laugh. It came out broken and ugly, right there in a diner booth at 7 o'clock in the morning, loud enough that the waitress 2 tables over glanced up. My father flinched like I'd hit him.
"Claire," he said.
"Dad, that's not possible," I said, flatly, because there was nothing left in me to be gentle with. "Ethan cannot have children. Not with me. Not with Brooke. Not with anyone. We have 3 years of medical records that say so. Cedar Grove Fertility Center. A specialist named Dr. Anaka Reyes. $40,000 and a diagnosis we cried about together in a parking lot. It is not possible." My father's face did something I had never seen it do before. It went gray, all at once, like a light switching off behind his eyes. "She showed us an ultrasound," he said quietly. 12 weeks. She said the due date was February. I sat back against the vinyl booth and felt the whole last week rearrange itself in my head, piece by piece, like a puzzle turning over to show its true picture for the first time. I thought about that smudge on the corner of the ultrasound photo, the one I'd told myself not to worry about, sitting in my mother's kitchen 4 days earlier. I thought about the fake text with details too specific to be guessed, built by someone who had clearly been documenting Ethan's life for months, maybe longer. I thought about the espresso machine nobody asked for, the book she carried but never read, the hard hat she bought online. The 4 years of small, quiet devotion that I had mistaken, over and over, for a sister who simply loved her family a little too hard. I asked my father to send me a photo of the ultrasound. He did, reluctantly, right there at the table, his hands not quite steady on his phone. I zoomed in on the corner, where I remembered the smudge. It was still there, clearer now on the higher resolution image than it had been on the printed copy. A partial logo. Most of it cropped away, but enough letters visible to make out 3 of them. El-Kiss. Underneath it, barely legible, a date stamp in gray text, the kind clinics print automatically along the border of every scan they hand out. I sat in that booth and did something I'd never expected to be doing at 7 o'clock in the morning, with my coffee going cold in front of me. I ran a reverse image search on my sister's proof of pregnancy. It took 4 minutes. The image matched, pixel for pixel, a post on a due date support forum from 14 months earlier, uploaded by a woman in Ohio. A different woman. A stranger. Celebrating her own 12-week scan under a username that had nothing to do with Brooke. The watermark belonged to a clinic called Lakeside OBGYN, 3 counties away, a practice Brooke had never once been a patient of. According to records we'd later confirm, she had downloaded a stranger's ultrasound off a public forum, cropped it as carefully as she could, and printed it out to hand to our mother as proof that she was carrying my husband's child. I put my phone down on the table between us. My father was watching my face, like it might tell him something his own eyes couldn't process yet.
She's not pregnant, I said.
Dad, she's not pregnant. She stole a photo from a stranger on the internet. He didn't say anything for a long moment. Then he picked up his coffee, finally, and drank it like it was the only thing steady enough in the room to hold on to. Outside the window, the diner's parking lot was filling up with the regular Tuesday morning crowd. Contractors in work boots, a couple of retirees splitting a plate of eggs. Ordinary people, starting an ordinary day. Entirely unaware that 2 tables over, an entire family's version of the truth had just quietly come apart and started to reassemble itself into something else. I sat there and understood fully for the first time exactly what my sister had been building for months, maybe longer. Not a crush that had gotten out of hand. Not a young woman making one impulsive, forgivable mistake.
No.
This was a campaign. Forged signatures. A stolen fellowship. Fabricated messages, built from months of quiet surveillance. A civil suit funded by our parents' retirement. A stranger's medical scan repurposed as a weapon. She hadn't stumbled into any of it. She had constructed it, piece by meticulous piece, the same patient, methodical way I'd once mistaken for devotion. And she had done it because somewhere along the way, she had convinced herself that the only thing standing between her and the life she wanted was me. I called Ethan from the diner parking lot before I did anything else. He was quiet on the phone for a long time after I told him, long enough that I asked if he was still there. She used our diagnosis, he said finally, his voice flat in a way I'd never heard from him before, not even the morning he got suspended. The thing we cried about in that parking lot, the thing we decided made us stronger instead of broken. She turned it into a costume and wore it to hurt you. I know, I whispered. I need a minute, he said. Not because I'm upset with you. I just need a minute before I can be useful to anyone today. I gave him the minute. I sat in my car outside the diner and watched him process it through the silence on the line. And when he came back, his voice was steadier, with that careful, load-bearing calm I'd married him for in the first place. Tell me what you need me to do, he said. And tell me what you need me to stay away from. I told him I needed to handle the confrontation myself, that I needed my mother and my father to hear it from me, without him in the room, complicating what should have been, at its core, a conversation between sisters.
He didn't argue.
He told me he loved me, and that he was proud of me for going, and that he'd have dinner ready whenever I got home, however long it took. I called my mother from the parking lot of the diner and asked her to be at the house by 9 o'clock. I told her to make sure Brooke was there, too. I didn't explain why. I didn't trust myself to say it calmly over the phone. And some part of me, I think, wanted her to see it happen in real time, the same way the whole family had watched Ethan get exposed in that backyard 5 weeks earlier. If Brooke wanted an audience for every accusation she'd made, she was going to get one for the truth. 2. Ethan wanted to come, but I asked him not to. This part, I told him, was mine to finish. I printed everything on the way over, sitting in the school parking lot with my laptop propped on the steering wheel, using the library's public printer app because our home printer was out of ink, and I didn't have it in me to wait. The reverse image search results. The forum post with its original timestamp, 14 months old, uploaded by a stranger 400 miles away. Screenshots of the Lakeside OBGYN watermark side by side with the cropped version Brooke had handed our mother. And underneath all of it, a single scanned page from Cedar Grove Fertility Center, the diagnosis letter Ethan had kept in our filing cabinet for 18 months. The one that made a pregnancy involving him a biological impossibility. My mother opened the door before I even knocked. She looked utterly exhausted, in a way that had nothing to do with sleep. Brooke was sitting on the living room couch, arms crossed, chin already tilted up, like she'd rehearsed the posture in a mirror. "I don't know why you're here," Brooke said, her voice tight. "Honestly, not after everything. I don't want to see you right now." "I have something for Mom," I said. I set the folder down on the coffee table, the same coffee table where 4 days earlier an ultrasound photo had been produced like a verdict. "You should probably look at it too." My mother sat down slowly and started going through the pages. I watched her face change, page by page. The way a person's face changes when a story they've been holding on to for a week starts to collapse under its own weight. "What is this?" she said quietly, holding up the printed forum post next to the ultrasound photo. "It's the woman Brooke stole her pregnancy from," I explained. 14 months ago, different state, different clinic. Brooke downloaded it, cropped the parts that would identify her, and told you it was proof my husband got her pregnant. "That's not," Brooke started. "Don't." I cut her off. It came out quieter than I expected, and somehow that made it land harder than if I'd shouted. "Don't do the thing where you tell us what actually happened. I have spent 5 weeks listening to what actually happened, Brooke. According to you, Ethan groomed you for years. According to you, he stole your architectural ideas. According to you, he threatened you at a barbecue in front of 40 witnesses who all watched him do nothing but read your own words back to you. According to you, he got you pregnant, which is medically impossible, and which you would have known was impossible if you had ever actually cared about him as a person instead of as a life you wanted to take from me." My mother's hand had gone to her mouth. Brooke's jaw was working the way it does right before she cries, but nothing came out of her. "I loved him first," she said finally, her voice small, almost a whisper. "Before you even brought him around, I saw him first at your work thing, before you two were even serious. It should have been me. It was never going to be you," I said, and my voice, though quiet, was firm. "Not because I stood in the way, but because he never wanted you. You spent 4 years building a version of him in your head, and then punishing the real one when he didn't match it. That's not love, Brooke. That's obsession with an ending you'd already written for yourself. You don't understand what it's like," she said, and her voice cracked open into something raw, something that had clearly been sitting under the surface for years. "You got everything first. The good grades, the wedding, the house, the husband everyone loves. I was supposed to get my own version of that, and it never came. And then I looked at your life, and I thought, why not that? Why not him? Why does she get to have all of it?" The room went completely silent. My mother was crying now, quietly, both hands pressed over her mouth. My father stood in the doorway behind me, having just arrived, still holding his keys, watching his youngest daughter say the truest thing she had said in 5 weeks. "You forged his signature," I continued, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. "You stole his work. You cost him his job. You spent our parents' retirement dragging us through a lawsuit built on lies. You called my principal and tried to take my career too. And when none of that broke us apart fast enough, you stole a stranger's ultrasound off the internet and used it to make our mother believe my husband had betrayed me with you. That is not heartbreak, Brooke. That is not wanting something and not getting it. That is a person willing to burn an entire family down because she convinced herself she was owed someone else's life." "I've been having panic attacks," Brooke said suddenly, her voice thin. "I haven't been sleeping. I almost went to the ER last week. Doesn't any of that matter to you?" "It matters," I said. And I meant it, because it was possibly the one true thing she'd said all summer. I hope you get real help for that. I mean that. But it doesn't rewrite what you did. And I'm not going to let you use how much you're struggling as the reason nobody's allowed to hold you accountable. Those can both be true. You can be in real pain and still be the person who did all of this. One doesn't erase the other. Brooke didn't say anything else. She just sat on that couch with her arms wrapped around herself, and for the first time in 5 weeks, nobody in the room looked at her like a victim. I need you to hear this clearly, because I am only going to say it once, I told her. I am done. Not angry done. Not I need space done. Just done. Whatever this was between us, it's over. And it's over because of choices you made. Not because of anything I did to you. You don't get to call this family in crisis and then act surprised when the crisis was you the whole time. I picked my folder up off the coffee table, left the copies for my mother, and walked out the front door into the kind of bright, ordinary morning that felt almost insulting given what had just happened inside. The lawsuit collapsed within 11 days. Denise Corwin withdrew as counsel the moment my mother forwarded her the forum post and the fertility clinic diagnosis, along with a message stating, in my mother's careful handwriting, that the family could no longer support the case. I never found out exactly what was said in that phone call, but I heard secondhand that Denise's paralegal used the word liability more than once. Civil complaints built on forged documents don't just fall apart quietly. They tend to expose the person who filed them to exactly the kind of consequences they were hoping to threaten someone else with. Ethan's firm reinstated him 9 days after the fake HR complaint had gotten him suspended. Their internal investigation traced the screenshots back to metadata that didn't match his phone, his account, or his location at any of the supposed dates. Pamela Ose, the compliance officer, called him personally to apologize, which he told me later felt strange. Hearing an apology from someone who had escorted him out of a building with a cardboard box under his arm. He went back to work the following Monday. His coworkers were kind about it, in the careful, overcorrecting way people are kind when they've spent a week assuming the worst about someone. A structural engineer named Doug even left a 6-pack of his favorite beer on Ethan's desk with a sticky note that just said, "Sorry, man." It wasn't much, but it was something. The fellowship application, the original one Brooke had submitted using Ethan's name and stolen blueprints, was formally withdrawn once the Sorrentino Foundation's administrative office received a signed letter from Ethan explaining the forgery, along with a police report. Because that's the part one haven't said yet. We did file a police report, both of us, for identity theft and fraud, once the lawsuit collapsed and there was nothing left protecting Brooke from consequences. A detective named Raina Ibra took our statement over 2 visits and told us flatly that forging a digital signature on a federal-adjacent application and fabricating medical evidence for a civil suit were both prosecutable. The district attorney's office would decide how far to take it. As of the last update I got months later, Brooke was in the process of a plea agreement that would keep her out of jail in exchange for restitution and a formal admission of the forgery. Though I've mostly stopped tracking the details, the restitution figure, when the deal was finally structured, came out to just over $11,000. That was the portion of my parents' retirement money that had already been spent on Denise Corwin's retainer before the case collapsed. It would be paid back in monthly installments, which Brooke's public defender negotiated down from her Brightside dental paychecks. It wasn't the $42,000 my parents had originally lost, because most of that had gone toward legitimate legal fees for work that had technically been performed. Lawsuit or no lawsuit. My parents wrote off the rest as a loss they would simply have to absorb into what retirement looked like now. I found I didn't need to watch every step of the legal process to feel like justice was happening. Knowing it was moving forward at all, without me having to carry it personally, was enough. An unexpected piece of relief came from a place I never anticipated. Doug, that structural engineer who'd left the 6-pack on Ethan's desk, also ran a small side business flipping foreclosed houses on weekends. He mentioned to Ethan, almost in passing, that his crew needed an extra hand on weekends for cash work, framing, drywall, the kind of physical labor Ethan hadn't done since college, but still remembered how to do. Ethan took him up on it that autumn. Partly for the money and partly, I think, because it felt good to build something with his hands after a summer spent being torn apart by paperwork. The extra income didn't fix what my parents had lost, but it let us quietly cover two of Denise Corwin's old invoices ourselves, the ones tied to work already completed before the case fell apart, so my parents wouldn't have to carry that particular debt into the winter. We never told them where the money came from. Some kindnesses land better anonymous, you know? The family split the way I imagine most families split under something like this. Not cleanly, not all at once, but in a slow, uneven scatter that took months to settle. My Aunt Carol called me in August, almost 7 weeks after the confrontation in my parents' living room, and apologized for the message she'd sent in June. "I should have asked you before I picked a side," she said. "I'm sorry I didn't." It wasn't a perfect apology. It didn't undo the sting of those "stay strong" comments from people I'd known my whole life. But it was real. And I took it as real because holding on to every small betrayal from that summer would have been its own kind of prison. My cousin Ryan, the one who'd sent the one-line "praying for your family" message, never apologized directly, but he started liking my posts again by September, which is its own quiet, imperfect language people use when they don't know how to say they were wrong out loud. I let that be enough, too. Ethan's own mother called him in tears again, this time to apologize, and asked gently if there was anything she could do to make up for believing a story that painted her own son as a predator, based on nothing but a stranger's fabricated confidence. He told her the truth, that there wasn't anything to make up for, not really. That he understood why a mother's first instinct is fear for the person she doesn't know as well, but that he needed her to trust him faster next time. Because next time there might not be proof this clean. My parents were the hardest part, and honestly, they still are some days. They lost $42,000 of retirement savings funding a lawsuit built on their youngest daughter's lies. And there was no getting that back. My father, 61 that year, had planned to retire at 65. He told me quietly over coffee at Pete's a few weeks after everything came apart that he was now looking at 68, maybe later, depending on the market. He said it without asking for sympathy. In the flat, practical way my father says most hard things. But I watched something in him settle a little heavier into his shoulders that morning, and it hasn't fully lifted since. They didn't disown Brooke. I want to be honest about that because it would be a cleaner story if they had. And this isn't a clean story. My mother especially went through her own private grief that summer. Not just over what Brooke had done, but over the 23 years she'd spent raising a daughter she realized she didn't fully know. She started seeing a therapist in July, something she'd never done in her life, and told me once, almost apologetically, that she needed help understanding how she'd missed it. I told her I didn't think she'd missed anything. I told her some things aren't visible until the person carrying them decides to let them out into the world. And by then, it's not about what you missed. It's about what happens next. Brooke made 2 more attempts at rewriting the story before she finally stopped. In late July, she called Ethan's cell phone directly, something she hadn't done since the barbecue, and left a voicemail claiming she'd been manipulated into the forgery by someone else. A vague, unnamed pressure she refused to specify further when he called her back to ask. He didn't call her back a second time. In August, she texted me a long message, paragraphs of it, arguing that I was the one who damaged the family by escalating things to the police, that a private matter should have stayed private, that I'd humiliated her the same way Ethan had at the barbecue, and I should have known better, given everything I claimed to feel about fairness. I read the whole message twice. Then I didn't respond. There was nothing left to argue about. She wasn't asking me to understand her. She was asking me to feel guilty for finally stopping her, and I had run out of guilt to give. Thanksgiving came 4 months after the confrontation in my parents' living room, and it was the first holiday in 23 years with an empty chair where Brooke should have been. My mother set the table the way she always did, out of habit more than planning, and stood there for a long moment, staring at the extra place setting, before quietly removing it and sliding the plate back into the cabinet without a word. Nobody mentioned it out loud. My father said grace a little longer than usual that year, and I noticed his voice catch just slightly on the line about family before he pushed through it and finished. We ate turkey and my mother's green bean casserole and talked about small, safe things. Ethan's promotion, my new curriculum unit on the progressive era, my father's consulting work, the way families do when they're all quietly agreeing not to discuss the things sitting in the room with them. Later that night, washing dishes side by side with my mother while Ethan and my father watched football in the next room. She told me, without looking up from the sink, that she'd driven past Elm Terrace Apartments the week before, out of some impulse she couldn't fully explain. She found the unit empty, a for rent sign already back up in the window. Brooke hadn't told her she was moving. My mother had found out from a leasing agent who happened to be outside when she pulled in. I don't even know what city she's in now, my mother said, drying the same plate for longer than it needed. My own daughter, and I don't know what city she's in. I didn't have anything to offer her except my hand on her shoulder and the quiet company of standing there while she cried into a dish towel for a few minutes before pulling herself together and asking if I wanted more pie. There is a version of this story where I tell you I felt nothing but relief once the lawsuit collapsed and the truth came out. That would be a lie. And I promised myself when I decided to write this down that I wasn't going to lie in either direction. I grieved that summer. Not for the sister who did those things. I understood by August that she was capable of things I hadn't let myself imagine a month earlier. But for the sister I remembered from before. The one who used to fall asleep in the passenger seat on long drives, forehead against the window. The one who called me crying from her college dorm during her first real heartbreak at 19, and I drove 2 hours at midnight just to sit with her. The one who gave a 9-minute wedding toast because she genuinely, at the time, could not stop talking about how much she loved watching me be happy. I don't know exactly when that sister disappeared, or if she was ever fully real to begin with, separate from the version of her that spent 4 years quietly building a case for a life that was never hers to take. Sometimes I wonder if both versions of her were real at once the whole time. The same way a house can have rot in the walls and still be a house you love living in, right up until the day the wall finally gives out, and you're forced to see the whole structure differently. I sat on my back porch one night in late August after Ethan had gone to bed and cried harder than I had at any point during the actual crisis. Not because anything new had happened, but because I finally had a quiet moment to feel the size of what I'd lost. A sister, not a villain in a story. A person I used to love without complication, who no longer existed in any version I could trust. Ethan found me out there around midnight. He didn't say anything. He just sat down next to me on the steps and let me cry until I was done. And then he made tea, badly, the way he always does. Too much honey and not enough steeping time. And we sat with our mugs in the dark and didn't talk about the lawsuit or the forgery or any of it. We just sat there together in the wreckage of a summer that had tried to take everything from us and hadn't quite managed it. It's been a little over a year now. Ethan is still at Marlowe and Finch. He made senior engineer in the spring, a promotion that had nothing to do with anything that happened that summer and everything to do with the fact that he is simply good at what he does. Careful and steady in a way that doesn't announce itself. Redwood Commons opened in the fall on schedule, and sometimes we drive past it on the way to dinner, and he points out small details nobody else would ever notice. A load-bearing beam he fought for. A stairwell he redesigned twice to get the sightlines right. I still teach American history at Millbrook High. My students this year don't know anything about the worst summer of my life. And I like it that way. There's something studying about standing in front of a room of 15-year-olds who only know me as the teacher who makes them care about the Homestead Act. My parents are still together, still in the house on Lehman Street, still figuring out what retirement looks like on a smaller number than they planned around. My father picked up part-time consulting work for a contractor friend, not because he loves it, but because it buys him a few more years of breathing room. My mother still goes to therapy every other week. She and I talk more now than we did before. In a strange way, the kind of closeness that sometimes only shows up after something breaks, and you have to decide deliberately to rebuild it instead of just letting the cracks sit there. We got a dog in the spring, a rescue mutt named Wexford with one ear that never sits right. And I mention it only because of how strange it felt to make a small, joyful decision again, after a year defined by lawyers and forged documents and reverse image searches. Ethan built him a proper dog run along the side of the house, level and load-bearing in a way no dog run ever needed to be, because that's simply how he builds things now. Careful, even when carelessness would have cost nothing. I watched him out the kitchen window one Saturday, checking his own measurements twice on a project that would only ever hold a 60-pound dog. And I understood it wasn't really about the dog run. It was about a man who had been accused publicly and viciously of being careless with the people in his life, quietly proving to himself, one true and steady thing at a time, that the accusation had never fit him. Brooke, and I don't speak. I don't say that with any satisfaction, and I don't say it with lingering anger either. It's simply where things landed. The way a house settles into its final shape after a storm has passed through it. My mother still sees her sometimes, still loves her the complicated, unconditional way mothers do, and I've made peace with that being her path, separate from mine. I heard secondhand that Brooke moved 2 hours away last spring, started over somewhere new, a fresh city where nobody knows the story. Some part of me hopes that's true, that she's building something honest for herself out there. Though I've learned not to hold my breath waiting for people to become better versions of themselves just because I want them to. I think about the barbecue sometimes, the exact moment that paper hit the picnic table and the whole yard went silent. I used to think of it as the worst moment of my life. I don't think that anymore. I think of it now as the moment the truth finally got louder than the performance. After 4 years of me quietly explaining away every small warning sign because the alternative, believing my own sister was capable of what she was capable of, felt impossible to hold. That's the thing nobody tells you about this kind of betrayal. It doesn't usually arrive all at once. It arrives in espresso machines nobody asked for, and unread books carried around like props, and a hard hat bought online. And a question about kids that felt invasive at the time and turned out to be reconnaissance. By the time it finally breaks fully into the open, you've already spent years training yourself not to see it clearly, because seeing it clearly would have cost you something you weren't ready to lose. I lost it anyway. In the end, I lost the sister I thought I had. The one who fell asleep against the car window on long drives. The one I drove 2 hours to sit with at 19. What I kept, what I built instead, is a marriage that survived being tested by someone who tried very hard to take it apart. And a family that is smaller now but more honest than it used to be. I kept my own clarity, too. The ability to trust what I see instead of what I'm told, to feel guilty for seeing. I used to think forgiveness was something you owed people simply because they shared your blood. That family was a debt paid automatically, regardless of what was done to collect it. I don't believe that anymore. I think you can love someone for 23 years and still reach a point where continuing to love them the same way would cost you everything else you've built. I think you're allowed to grieve a person who is still alive, still out there somewhere in a city you don't know the name of, and still choose not to let them back into the part of your life they tried to burn down. Both things are true at once. I've stopped needing them to resolve into something simpler. If there's a thesis to this whole ugly summer, it's this. Some people don't destroy your life because they hate you. They destroy it because they've convinced themselves quietly, patiently, over years, that your life was always supposed to be theirs, and that taking it isn't theft. It's correction. My sister never once, in 5 weeks of forged signatures and stolen ultrasounds and drained retirement accounts, said the words, "I'm sorry," and meant them. She said, "It should have been me." And in that single sentence, I finally understood everything. Not an apology, but a manifesto. She hadn't been trying to hurt me. She'd been trying to become me, one theft at a time. And when that failed, she was willing to burn down everything standing between us rather than admit the life she wanted was never hers to take. I still have that folded parking ticket somewhere, in a drawer I haven't opened in months. I don't know why I kept it. Maybe because it was the first solid piece of proof that something was really, deeply wrong. The first thread that, once I pulled it, unraveled everything else. Or maybe I kept it because some part of me still wants physical proof on paper. That I didn't imagine any of it. That the sister I loved for 23 years really did convince herself she was destined to become me, and really did try to burn our family to the ground to prove it. And that, in the end, the truth held anyway. It always does, if you're patient enough and brave enough to keep looking for it.